Hello, welcome to the show. This is me. I'm live with a guest almost every week, basically every Thursday. So glad you're here to do the live thing because we want your questions, we want your chat. That's why we're doing this live, is to get the interactivity with you, the audience. So welcome to the show every Thursday. My name is Bret. I do Docker things and Kubernetes things and container things, basically all the DevOps container stuff. That's what you come here for. And we've got a bunch of new stuff coming up. Actually, we're talking about some new videos for the YouTube show. Always working on course stuff. But if you want to get those updates, check out my Patreon, where basically it's like a newsletter. You get one email a week, more or less, and it's who's going to be on the show. It's what open source I'm releasing. It's any new content I've made. It's not me retweeting all the random headlines. It's just what is new and that I'm creating, basically. So you can join there. You don't have to pay any money, but if you want to buy me a coffee every month, you can for some benefits. Or you can just click the follow button and just get the email newsletter thingy. Also, right above me, devops.fan. That's our Discord server, talking all things DevOps. We just crossed 9,000 people. That's pretty awesome. I'm excited about that. So come join us there and hang out in your favorite channels. And my favorite channel personally is the memes channel, which is the opposite of work, but it's good stuff. I recommend it. So anyway, let's get to the show. I've got a friend of mine that we've actually had on the show before. Gareth, hello.
Hey everyone.
So Gareth Rushgrove is actually, I met him at Docker, but now he's VP of product at Snyk, and we're going to talk about security stuff today. I mean, that's what Snyk does. That's what Gareth's all passionate about, and I love talking security, so we thought this would be a great topic. Hopefully you all agree.
Yeah,
thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So we don't have a strict agenda, so we're definitely going to take questions from the audience on especially things around developer security problems, tooling, workflows. Basically, what is a developer today able and should be doing related to security that they shouldn't just like pawn off on a security team or wait for somebody to tell them what they should do, but what they should proactively be looking at. That's, I think, a topic that we're both interested in, and let's hit it off.
I think also the
go ahead.
Also the security side, like I think security is changing, but it's changing not just for developers, it's changing for security professionals as well. It's a bit topic you're familiar with, this whole DevOps change systems administration. I used to do a bunch of system administration stuff. That seems to be a job title that's fallen out of favor for SRE or DevOps related things. It didn't go away. It morphed. It changed. It became actually way more interesting. Security is going through the same thing. Security experts are having to change at the same time as people going oh, they're going to go away. It's no, they're experts for a reason. Yeah, not just the changes to developers, but changes to security roles as well. I think is super interesting.
Yeah. There's that no-ops movement, but I never hear anyone talking about no-sec movement. So that's not really a thing. All right, we've got no questions, but that's okay because we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. Hello, nap time. I don't know if you come here to sleep. Nap time soon, maybe after the show. Hey, what's up, Martin? And Nagashi, thanks for being here. So maybe this is a little bit of a vague topic, but I've got a little gray in me. So I've been around forever doing this stuff, and a lot of times what I see out of a security office is writing policies and maybe some procedures, but mostly policies, and then running tools and getting reports. That's what I used to see out of it, and I never really understood how does that interact other than them just blaming me for a bad piece of code or a bad CVE in my dependencies or something. What do you see the interaction? How do you see that interaction changing between the dedicated security staff and the developers themselves?
The main way I hope it changes, and it is changing for lots of organizations, is for the better, because that's just horrible for everyone. The whole sort of security at the end, excluded from everything else, not really empowered to make changes. of course they end up with like doing the thing they can do, generating some reports, and for their own sanity to a certain extent, you then go like, okay, like what's the best tool I can use to generate reports? And like I love spreadsheets, but also not always the best tool. It ends up as a bit of a sort of frustrating place to be.
Yeah.
For a security person. A lot of them have been cut off from developers. They've been cut off from having like being able to fix security problems. And so I hope that's changing. I hope that I think we've seen with the sort of whole DevOps movement that like it's put front and center collaboration, communication, working together. That goes for security and development, and as it does for operations and development, and where people are embracing that, and they have been for a while. That's changing that relationship. From the developer standpoint, yeah, who wants to work on something for like months and then get a report at the end going like, by the way, you're insecure.
Right. Right. It's the bad news bears, right? It's just if sometimes exactly. All you hear is negative stuff. Yeah.
Even if it's even if it's right, even if it's correct, even if it's like it's often not actionable, it's bad news at the wrong times. It sets up an antagonistic relationship that just like isn't conducive to again like doing what both sides want is to solve the security problems. Developers get a bad rep of like not caring about security, and like with loads of I've come from being like doing like lots of individual software development and systems administration bits and falling into product and now like management bits, and it's clear like a lot of it's just incentives. How have you incentivized your developers to care about security? And in a lot of cases it's like, oh no, we haven't. And like, are you surprised that they don't?
Right.
So I think that's changing in the in organizations that acknowledge this. They're embracing like saying, no, this is not a security problem. This is a development problem. Security has expertise. Work with them as experts, but don't try and outsource to them. Like the messaging around SRE has been very much that SREs are not your outsourced ops team. They are there to help your organization build more reliable systems. That internal consultant aspect to that trusted friend, like that's how security is, I think, when it's done well. And that's how it's starting to happen in organizations that are really like realizing that what they were doing doesn't work that well.
Right. So one of the ways I think that, and we've talked about this before, but and I've mentioned this on this show before, you have this great little tool that's like a VS Code add-in. So I want to talk about a specific tool for a little bit, because a lot of times I feel like developers, they just don't know what to do. And they don't like reviewing their list of all the dependencies every day, or running a scanner in the morning and then filling their day with fixing new vulnerabilities in their dependencies isn't really on the top of the radar of a lot of developers. It's extra work. It's never perfect. There's always something that some mid or high vulnerability that you can't really get rid of yet, or it's not fixed or whatever. So there's a lot of potential churn there, and you all came out with a free add-in, if I remember correctly, for VS Code that basically, and this whole shift left thing. First of all, can you tell us what shift left is? Shift left security. Talk about that for a minute.
Again, like fundamentally, it's a buzzword. Like it's marketing, but it's a good moniker. Like lots of things like that. Just really saying like, do things earlier, and earlier in software development invariably does mean with the development team. Like that idea that build something and then seeing if it's secure, or build something and see whether it's like, oh look, does it perform well? Probably not. Is it secure? Probably not. Does it scale? Probably not. Like, at least reasoning about those things earlier and making explicit choices. I think that's what shift left to me is. It's how can you make these conversations happen earlier in the process about these sort of core sort of properties of the system you're building?
Yeah.
It's not like it's. I think what's interesting is for lots of people that's just how they work now. But I think remembering that's like completely different to the sort of how things used to be from a certain perspective. It's like no, it was their responsibility to write code. Like someone else, and tests. Like, and there are still organizations that work like that, but like ultimately, the idea that someone writes the code and someone else somewhere else potentially writes the tests. That's not the norm anymore.
Right.
Like yes, a developer could tell you, "Oh no, I don't write unit tests. That's someone else's job." Like, I'm not hiring that developer. Like that's like okay, someone can have that opinion. I'm not going to hold it against you, but I'm not going to like think you're a great developer for the organizations that I work for. And I don't think I'm saying that heretically. 10 years ago, you could have had someone on and they were saying that, and that would have been like novel and new. I don't think it is today.
Right.
Development responsibilities are changing, not just because we have good tools, but because we learn how to do things and the tools get better because we do it more. Security is in that loop now. Software testing tools are way better today than they were 15 years ago. I can tell you, I was like using like some pretty horrible software testing tools 15 years ago. Like they are massively better today. Security is on that journey. Security of like developers becoming more involved in security and the tools becoming better as a positive feedback loop. Snyk is part of that. And you mentioned the like VS Code plugin. Like reports at the end are useful. Reports are useful. Tools in the developer tools are useful for different things. So whether it's like IDE integrations or pull requests, or I know you've seen the integration we have in Docker desktop. Like they're all like this is where developers live. Not it's like you don't want something downstream. You want it in your CI. You want it in your source control system. You want it in your editor. That in essence is what like Snyk's doing, and others. Like there's lots of other like great open source tools and great companies on that journey to make software development more secure.
Yeah. A lot of times, when the rubber hits the road of, because it's a whole separate conversation about do I secure code, blah 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 blah. But a lot of times that's a very vague conversation to have because it really depends on a lot of things, a lot of factors, languages, frameworks, teams, what your app is actually doing, all that stuff. But do you think we could break down like almost a checklist of like what does a modern developer, what are they expected to be using or process? So we've mentioned like writing tests, automating your tests on every commit, including some sort of security scans, I assume, in that CI run. So that's running basically every time you're checking in code or even locally, you're able to see if you're adding new vulnerabilities that are known. I mean, we're talking about CVEs, I guess, but
I think you sort of assumed something and jumped over it that I think is actually the one biggest thing there, which is continuous integration. That is like I think that's the thing that is allowing for actually pretty nuanced conversations about like how we improve software development pretty quickly, because that's the thing everyone can hook into. Actually, loads of organizations don't still have continuous integration, but a lot more do today than previous. And I think in lots of cases, there's nearly a split there between not just everyone assuming CI exists and then build on. Like actually, CI is the thing. Like get good at continuous integration, and then reason about important things I can add to that. It's like point of integration. I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it comes to security there, I would say really optimizing for things that run quickly and sort of without much configuration give you actionable feedback. Um, that's I think that if you don't start there, um, the risk is you end up with basically another job,
Right.
of like that you create more work and before you've really improved anything. And the problem there is you've done some work, you've created some more work, and you haven't improved something, and it's very easy for someone to say you should stop now, as opposed to getting a fast like result back.
Right.
And so optimizing for that, like some results quickly, as opposed to all the results at great expense.
Right.
Security is fundamentally a risk discipline. Um, Security people will make jokes like, "Well, yeah, the best way of making this secure is to turn it off, or for it not to exist," which is both
Right.
true and not super useful.
Right.
Like it's the if you are building an application and you're putting it on the internet, you are exposing yourself to a degree of risk. You cannot control all of that. You can mitigate some of it. Okay, what are you doing? What There's a difference between the risk I'm willing to accept when I build something and put it on the internet under my own name for, like, I don't know, showing cat pictures, or when I used to work at the UK government building like sensitive systems. Like, there's a difference in risk appetite and the level of like investment you'll put in.
Right.
So that frustrates people because like you sort of want what you wanted was an answer that says like just do this and you'll be secure, because that would be great. It's more nuanced. It's a risk discipline at the same time as you do want some quick wins. I think things like even just like linting code, like sort of static analysis tuned for high like positive results rather than finding all the problems. Find the ones that absolutely 100% are problematic and serious. For vulnerabilities, you can't if you're coming to this new and you've been building an application in a language like JavaScript that has a very deep sort of package ecosystem, you might run a software component analysis scan and go like, whoa, okay, I've got 500 vulnerabilities. I am putting this down now. Right. Actually, like, just tune that and say, look, I am just going to care about like step one, critical vulnerabilities. Like, and you go, okay, I'm going to fix those.
Yeah, there's 30 now instead of 300. Yeah.
Well, ultimately you fix those and you made things better, like without getting too scared about that number. And I've seen organizations do this at organizational scale where they go, yeah, this is going to take us a while to fix. And you know what? We reduce that threshold little by little, like once a month.
Right.
And they get good at it. And actually, I think what happens there is like to start with, everyone does it because they have to. And then some teams get good at it and they actually run ahead of the sort of raising bar.
Right. That's why I love a lot of this automation. In fact, okay, so two things you mentioned that I wanted to say that over the last year, I've been talking about SuperLinter a lot on this show because it's basically my default. And when I've trained myself now that if I'm in a project with the customer on my own even stuff that I just play around with, I'm always adding SuperLinter to every repo by default at the beginning, and I'm running that on every commit in the main branch, release branches, and the PRs, because it's actually making me a better Markdown writer, a better developer. Even in Terraform, it warns me of insecure things. Like I think the Terraform scanner warned me that my AWS metadata endpoint was not secure because of the way I was using it. Like it makes me learn new things about my security without having to wait for a security team to tell me I'm bad. And I love that because I feel like it, like you're saying, it changes behavior, it changes my default attitude, it makes me better over time. And the other thing is having the automation. I feel like the future of automations is it's basically so deeply integrated, or it comes with your code platform, your repo hosting platform, that to me is now like the gold standard, where I don't have to go find a way to do automation. It's already in the tools I have. And this whole idea of the public marketplaces to get automations, canned Docker builds, canned Snyk scans, like coming out of the box with very little effort, five lines of YAML or something, and having that run in a way that a developer can't avoid it, or a DevOps person can avoid it because it's running in the cloud. It's not, did you do this before you checked in code kind of attitude, which is, I know teams that used to manage Git hooks on their dev machines to enforce local tooling behavior, but it's always spotty. It's never a guarantee.
Yeah.
There's no central report. So I love this automation first approach, and everything, like you're saying, changing at the org level, the behaviors by implementing some of these standard automations that everyone has to adhere to. And I feel like that's great. I've seen positive results every time I do it. So
I think that's you want the best of both those worlds. You want central enforcement because people will work around it. You want central data because insights about how you're doing this over time can help you get better. But you also want local tooling. Too many people, I still think, with loads of things like and I think I'm biased, but Docker was a huge exception to this. And and honestly, one of the reasons I think Docker really exploded was the attention to detail in the local experience. Like that arguably was the center and strength of what Docker did. But there's lots of other examples as well. And I think that's often lost in some of the advantages and things you want about central bits. Like you want that enforcement is a good one, and data in aggregate is a good one. But you want that and local tooling. That's definitely one of the
right. Yeah. For sure.
We wrestle with it, Snyk, but also we've got that's makes things harder. We spend a lot of time integrating into all of those developer tools at both ends,
right,
rather than just, oh look, you use security and it's a CI thing. We've got, and I think this is something we'll see not just in security tools, but lots of developer tools. I think we'll see this. We've got integrations into all the source control systems. We've got integrations into all of the CI/CD integration sort of systems. We've got local CLI tools. We've got the IDE integrations you mentioned. We've got built into Docker. And from a certain perspective, you're like, well, wait a minute, these all overlap. You're not going to use all of them. That's crazy. No, you're
right.
not. What we see is different companies are in different positions. Not everyone is the same. And some of them swear by one integration and some swear by a different one. And they're both right in their context. There's not one way of doing it. And I think that's something to learn for anyone building developer tools, really. Like that you want to have a wide impact. It's definitely true in security. Good local experience for developers to, like you said, learn and fix problems. Central bits for the sort of audit control. But if they don't work together, you'll have split brain, you'll have disagreements across that boundary. How do you join both of them up is it's an interesting challenge. At the same time, I think that's the future of good security tooling. It's the future of lots of good developer tooling as well.
Right. A slight topic change. Nagashi has a question. Threat modeling. So it might be a bit off topic here, but but which threat modeling software do you guys use? Last time I asked, it was something like that. I had to use spreadsheets. There must be a better way. I know nothing on this topic, so I'm not going to be any help.
Yeah, this is a great area. I've not seen. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because I'm probably less close to some of the security audience software, but I've not seen anything that's like very developer oriented, like as a piece of software for threat modeling. The best threat modeling things I've done have been it's been paper and people, because I think a lot of the threat modeling is about the conversation parts. Um, but yeah, there's definitely tools that can help there. I don't know any off the top of my head, and I think partly because I've not seen anything that's very that developer oriented. Um,
Yeah.
like maybe Snyk can help. Like I'd like to think so. Like not today, but this like we want to help solve these types of problems where like how do you bring security to developers? That is a really broad. It turns out that like that was Snyk's original sort of founding sort of goal principle, if you like.
Right.
We'll be at that a while. We've gone quite broad already. We sort of cover like infrastructure security, we cover containers, we cover like static analysis and stuff like component analysis. Like, but honestly, application security, developer security is broader than that. Yeah, I love that question without having a great like, you should just do this.
Yeah. And, well, and
yeah.
does okay. So I have a limited understanding of what threat modeling is. Is that something that normally is done by the security team at trying to predict potential risk?
Well, I think that's one of maybe the sort of problems that like a lot of these disciplines have grown out of security expertise, but the security team actually probably like, on in isolation probably isn't as good at doing threat modeling as it can be involving development teams. Threat modeling is literally just like really, and there are different like frameworks for doing so, but fundamentally, like what are the threats of this system? Like what, like who can attack it? How can they attack it? Why would they attack it? What's valuable here? It's bringing some of that sort of like just think like an attacker mentality to like to software design, I think. And yeah, that like who knows more about some of the like that software than the development team. I think as well, especially when you think it's not just the software, it's the systems. Like you start getting worried about lots of things that aren't just the software you've written.
Yeah.
Like it might be thinking about that developer. Are they a risk? Is that code contribution from an open source library a risk? Is the laptop I'm running a risk? Is my mobile phone a risk? Because and the answer is obviously like just building that model of like the different threats for your system. I mean, yeah, it's an opportunity for collaboration, working together. Like security has the expertise; they'll know the lingo. They'll be able to think a bit like that. Doing workshops with developers that makes that output better.
Yeah, I think that one of the best implementations.
Nagashi's got a definition there, which I think is great. Threat modeling is about identifying potential attack vectors and classifying them by level of risk, and mentioning how you can mitigate those if they happen. Nice, succinct.
Yeah, the one of the best experiences I've had, I guess, with this directly, and I don't have that many experiences, is when I'm working with a company big enough to have a red team and sort of the red team, blue team mentality. And I learned like a good team internally that's trying to find the holes in my stuff won't be adversarial, and it will be a collaboration, like you're saying, so that it helps me make my stuff better without me feeling like I suck at it. And
the thing that's really interesting there is like that and lots of organizations aren't big enough or don't have that sort of capability. But the ones who do, the good ones work like that. They don't go, oh, we're the experts and we do this. They go, we're the experts and we do this with you and you get smarter because we do it. That's the sort of that's good security. Like that's where you like work with others. I should mention Adam Shostak's book, Threat Modeling: Designing for Security, is well worth a read. Um, it's been around a while now. I can't remember how long when I read it. But that's definitely a good like
What's it called?
book to read about different. It's called Threat Modeling: Designing for Security by Adam Shostak. Um, it's great. Highly recommend that. Like for security people or for developers, I think it's just well written, which isn't always the case with tech books, as we know. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
It's great.
Nice. I'll put that in chat for people.
That's that question about the sort of the tools that I fundamentally don't think it's a tool problem with threat modeling, but tools could definitely help. How they're integrated into like the frameworks we use, like would be really interesting. There's definitely some like threads to pull there.
Yeah. One of the topics we put down to talk about today was like talking about Log4Shell and using that as an example of how is it changing teams and culture because of how, it affects so many and so much. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I know you came to me with ideas around how that's changing teams or culture.
Yeah, it's still fresh in my mind. Obviously, Log4Shell was a busy time for myself, but also for lots of people on the internet. For those that didn't see, really, just a series of vulnerabilities in reality in the super popular Log4j logging library and sort of derivatives that landed back basically middle of December. There's a classification for vulnerabilities 10. This was at the top of the scale. This was like your world is ending. This is people affected need to solve this right now as quickly as they can do. This is organizations like say pulling out all the stops, pulling all-nighters, going on call. This was the internet is stopping while we do this moment. It's not the first. It won't be the last. At the same time as talking to a lot of like business leaders after this does feel like it's had a lot more visibility at a business level, at a government policy level, especially in the US. There seems to just be a lot more of and not just a security or developer conversation about software supply chain security. Time will tell whether that turns into action and improvements. But it definitely felt different to some of the sort of like large scale vulnerabilities. And I do want to shout out like there as well, just because there's been too much said the other way. Like just how amazingly the Log4j maintainers did. This is a whole bunch of people who are maintaining and building software often in their free time. Some of them, for their own purposes, just went above and beyond for what was basically at least 2 weeks. Working with I don't know how many private messages they got from everyone from government to large banks. I do not but my guess is a lot. Just dealing with that and actually shipping new versions with these fixes in, they did unbelievably well, and I think got wholly unfair criticism from outside where people are wholly underappreciating how open source works. So I do want to shout out, just give the Log4j developers a job, because this would have been worse if they hadn't done a pretty amazing job.
Okay. That's some good insight, because a lot of us aren't involved in all these little niche communities of open source, and it's not like it's just 20 people on the internet making this stuff. And it is pretty rare to see, I don't know how many emails I got from how many companies about this. like cloud. Trying to think, like my clouds would. I probably got emails from cloud vendors. I probably got emails from tooling vendors. Um, it's like everyone everyone was in on it. I mean, everyone was in on like, this is bad. This is how we can help.
Well, I think that it hit a critical mass there, and so like working for Tolerant at the moment, again, ignoring the security side, like all of our customers were asking, okay, how are you affected when, like, can I keep using your software basically while I what, like, so large organizations ask this of everyone they work with. That's a good thing, but obviously what that meant is that every single company on the internet wanted to proactively deal with that rather than reactively dealing with every single one of their customers coming to them. And so, yeah, everyone put out, like, this is what we're doing, which obviously, again, like, raises the visibility of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
And yes, security vendors, like Snyk is not included, like, we are there to help. These are the types of problems that we're there to help you address. And yes, that's a marketing opportunity. But honestly, it's that, like,
Also,
like
all vulnerabilities are marketing and news, right?
Don't blame us for that too much.
Yeah. Everybody loves to talk about bad news. So yeah, whenever it's, but I mean, like even like in this case, I just pulled up because I remembered this happened, and like Cloudflare was like, hey, even if you're a free user of our, was essentially if you're not using Cloudflare, one, it's awesome, and two, one of the things it can do is it adds a sort of a proxy layer to any of your web front ends, and they're basically like, hey, we're gonna, for free, even if you're not paying us, we're going to help detect and prevent attacks over HTTP if you're using our service. And it's so rare. I mean, like how many CVEs a year is like the entire industry trying to figure out their way of, yes, marketing. It helps, goodwill is always a good thing. But also, like, I would have never thought about my proxy or DNS company being involved with a web server vulnerability before that, like that's not something I would have expected. Maybe if I had a specific tool that was a proxy or I was paying for a service, but I don't know.
Well,
I look at Cloudflare as a little
what
different.
we generally talk about as web application firewalls.
Yeah,
like that's a whole industry to itself. That's something that, like, large companies will buy, like,
yep,
companies will sell to them. But yeah, I mean, like, I know web application firewalls, you don't. Does that makes it more likely for me to be secure? That feels wrong. Like, them being built into the platforms that we use like that, and enabled by default, like, fundamentally just makes, like, defaults are a huge, like sort of lever for improved security. They're a hard one to pull. Kubernetes is a great example. Kubernetes arguably has, like, some places where the defaults are not that secure, or could be a lot more secure, and they're not at this point because changing some of those defaults would break everything, and so need to be handled carefully over a long period of time, and that's actually really dull, boring, painful work, and people are not always incentivized to do so. The RBAC changes that were made in Kubernetes were, like, when Kubernetes was much smaller and when it was still really painful, and you, like, have angry blog posts about it on the internet, like, still, like, the secure defaults are hugely powerful, but if you have insecure defaults, again, that changing them at the platform level can be really difficult. Like, even when it's like, oh, this would actually work for 95% of users, in lots of cases, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Unless you can identify the 5% very accurately and work around that. Like, so that's actually where a lot of security tools then help. Someone asking in the channel there about, like, talk a bit about container testing containers to make sure they have same structure, run as non-privileged users, boot as expected, open ports. They're great examples where, like, of and actually some people criticize things like Dockerfile as part of the build toolchain because it's so open. Like you have to do those things yourself. That's
Yeah.
great because it's powerful and you can do like it makes things easier. Also, like, and there's a whole bunch of higher level Docker build tools that people say, oh, you should use this because it's more secure. They're generally a sort of a rounding error to the usage for building containers still, because Dockerfile is so the user interface, the user experience, the power and flexibility win out over secure defaults.
Yeah.
That's a interesting challenge today for anyone building developer tools. Like where like it, I think it's good to do it explicitly. I think like that it's not you should always default to the security thing. You should always default to the developer experience thing. There is a bit of a real world pattern of the easy thing will win.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you make the easy thing secure? If you can't, do you choose to make it secure, which might actually mean you lose? There's some great like sort of like design decisions that have led to like again like winning that have been like I this is not criticism, but I think some people do actually say it as criticism. Mongo and Redis both exploded onto the scene. They're both wildly popular today because they appeal to developers. Databases were hard, and they did a great deal of different things to make storage easier for a developer. I think in slightly different ways, but like neither of them had authentication. And that right. was a design decision and a feature. Their point was, no, like that's a layer above that you deal with to start with. I remember going to FOSDEM, I think it was, and which has an amazing, like even whatever 10 years ago, an amazing sort of IPv6 like network for everyone. So you just turned up and every device in the whole huge several thousand people has an IP. Turns out that's not normal, and no one thinks about that. And lots of people were just running Mongo instances on their machines, and well, now they're addressable on the local network. And people, there were a bunch of people at FOSDEM who were just while driving the network looking for open Mongo instances on people's laptops and filling their laptops' disks up. Like you still hear horror stories of this company got hacked because their Mongo instance or their Kubernetes API was public on the internet.
Yeah,
and it's like those things became popular because of not because of that not having authentication, but because they optimize for developer like happiness and ease of use and flexibility at a trade-off of security. And I'm not saying that's the wrong one, but how do we get smarter about the layers and understanding of the implications of those types of things? Or have platforms like you just showed the Cloudflare example that actually mitigate the risks of those things. There's lots of interesting nuance there.
I've never seen I'll go out and say it, and just that I've never seen any of these tools that choose to not turn on authentication by default ever turn out well for them, right? It never. Postgres, a great example. The Postgres container for the longest time didn't require authentication, and then they finally decided to change it, like in 2019, and it broke everything. It broke all my stuff. It broke all my production, not production stuff, but because I would have turned on authentication, but like all of my courses, anything I was doing sort of open source and just willy-nilly, all my demos, everything broke because they realized, oh yeah, we should probably have a login by default. And and we continue to learn this lesson. The Kubernetes dashboard didn't have authentication by default. The Kubernetes API didn't have RBAC by default. That's one of the reasons I loved Swarm. One of the biggest reasons was it had that mutual authentication built in for nodes. You couldn't turn it off. It was on by default. It was easy. I loved it. And I because I'm the one that's always seeing developers choose those things poorly, and I'm like, hey, the bad news is you need to put authentication in there. and it becomes a pain to change later. So I'm that guy.
So this is where I'm going to be horrible. And you say it doesn't work out for them. Actually, in all the cases you mentioned, it worked out very well for them.
Oh, okay.
It didn't work out as well for you and some other
right.
users. But Mongo launched a hugely successful database that's used by, like, it's great,
yeah.
and became a public company. Like, it definitely worked out for them. Like Kubernetes and Swarm. Like I love Swarm too, but there are definitely fewer Swarm users today than there are Kubernetes users.
Right.
And like, I'm not saying that the reason why that is the case is it had authentication or security, but there is a pattern of if it's not and like the counterexample, or like one other counterexample, the opposite out with Docker. People say, "Oh, Dockerfile allows you to build insecure images." It does, and there are higher level tools that will always build you more secure images. There are. Do you know what most people use to build their container images? It's definitely Docker build. Like it won because of I think ultimately, yes, inertia, but user experience, user interface, like low barrier to entry, and security can get in the way. Well-designed security doesn't have to, but that's still something I think we're all learning how to do.
Mm-hmm. To some of the Nagashi and Arslav, I'm gonna mispronounce that. They were talking about like tooling, again, back to tooling, making non-privileged, like the thing about testing containers and whatnot. So this goes back to our linting. Like, I think that one of the things is, I was just showing the Snyk tool for IAC, but there's definitely there's security-focused linters, and that's one of the things why I believe in this idea of super linting, is because one of the challenges as a developer is that there's always another linter. There's always another scanner. There's always something else you can also run. But one, how do you learn about all these things and become knowledgeable in them? And two, you just kind of want it all on by default, and it's sort of maintained. And so I hate to keep pimping on the super linter project, but the idea that the community has actually come together on GitHub to keep adding additional scanners, like now we have Git leaks in there, we have you name it, the infrastructure as code file is in that scanner. And tell me about the Snyk one, because it's been in a beta for a while, right? I saw it in the beta, or I saw that there was a beta of it, and I didn't really keep up with what had happened with that.
Yeah, it's available, general availability now. But there's, I think there's sort of two distinct things there, and I think we've focused on one area, like, well, maybe three. The Dockerfile example is a good one, where actually it's a small subset of sort of well-known issues. Hadoop Lint's a great example of a lint tool that's sort of been there for years now and does a good job for some of those bits. Small number of things, small domain. Like Dockerfile is not a big syntax. Hadoop Lint's typically been the one I've used. We might do some things with Snyk later, because just the popularity of Dockerfile. And we've got some other Dockerfile security scanning tools in Snyk now. Snyk infrastructure as code focuses on sort of Terraform and Kubernetes configurations and CloudFormation and ARM templates and that sort of space. Mainly because it's a much broader syntax, but also the rules at the other side invariably are like deeper. They're not. There are simple things about, like, oh yeah, your Kubernetes config shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. But actually, when you start building more complex configurations that cross different types of things, you get quite a bit of nuance. The cloud providers themselves, like the AWS API service catalog is pretty big now. And also they're shipping new APIs all the time. They're shipping new services all the time. The rate of evolution there. The complexity means that there's quite a lot of like hidden best practice as well as the documented side. So that's an area where Snyk sort of invested in. Like, we've got research team that does a lot of the work there. We generate rules, and we basically make a tool that allows you to not be that expert. Like you want one of those in your company somewhere who's like, no, I know all about securing AWS. This is a way of getting a bunch of that, stopping that person having to do a bunch of the dumb things. Like get that out early in the development process, have it in your IDE into like locally, have it flagged in your CI/CD system, be able to report on it from your SCM. That's what the Snyk infrastructure as code product sort of focuses on. Yes, reports to the compliance folks, but develop the tools for the developers, like integrated together.
Yeah, did you mention Hadoolint a while ago? Is that what you were saying?
Area there, yeah. Hadoolint's the one I used for the longest time when building Docker files.
Yeah, sorry, I was just
also.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think there's sort of a third thing there, which is like when the rules are not general, they're very specific to you. Like a lot of the time, like security best practices, it's the same. It's because we're both using, let's say, Azure, and so we should be doing the same thing. But sometimes it's like, no, you're Bret Fisher and you're building something for you, and I'm Gareth and I'm working at a bank and we've got some specific internal rules because we're governed by a certain compliance policy or whatever. That can get organizationally specific very quickly. Mm-hmm. I created, and there's now a whole team of maintainers on a tool under the Open Policy Agent project called Conftest. That was basically a testing framework for configuration. It uses the Open Policy Agent Rego language. So like linters have the advantage of being like low barrier to entry and fast results, but generally fixed like set of things there. They're great for sort of small domains. They're great for sort of fixed domains.
Right. Like does your user
sort of
root
end of the spectrum where it's and great for things where all of us care about them or most people care about them. Contests the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like, no, like I care about this very specific thing and I can write my own rules for that. So that was definitely a learning from Puppet, and that's sort of I used to Puppet, but before that I was a big Puppet user, which is how I ended up working there. Like the testing tools there were great. Puppet domain specific language for writing configuration. Puppet lint existed to catch like quick things, and Puppet test allowed us to write like unit tests for the configuration. And I sort of wanted that for everything. Mm-hmm. And I think there are lots of good linters. Conftest is basically the general purpose like config testing tool.
Yeah. So it's almost like, so we're saying step one is linting. If we're talking about tooling, step two is more of these advanced scanners that require security, that will have a necessity for understanding organizational rules and adding those policies. And that's what you're saying the IAC thing is with Snyk, right? And
well, yeah, the IAC thing brings a lot of the security smarts because you've got to appreciate that domain gets big quite quickly. Hadoolint's great because it's a small domain and a fixed sort of space problem. It doesn't have that many rules. It doesn't need that many rules.
Right.
They're really sort of static analyzers, and static analysis as you get into more complex code or more complex domains ends up a much more complex problem. So like you end up needing to understand the like declarative languages make static analysis easier, which is infrastructure as code. We also look at like static analysis of like Java or JavaScript or Go. Or, like that's a much more harder problem to do, especially quickly. Mm-hmm. Like anyone who's ever tried to do like a code search using regexes, like that's not ever going to work at scale. That
right?
How do you like do that every time you add a letter to your Java file, like in your IDE, and get security results back? That's not going to work. So back to one of the things we talked about earlier is like just that importance of speed and local developer tools. for these things.
Yeah. All right. The last topic I want to talk about with you, we mentioned OpenSSF before the show, and I am not. I think either you or someone else has told me about it before, but I'm not really sure what it is and what it isn't. It's part of the Linux Foundation. Stands for Open Source Security Foundation. And is this something that becomes practical to us? Like, does this turn into like guidance, or is this more of an industry thing that we won't really, like, as end users, we won't really see anything out of this?
Yeah, no, definitely. So OpenSSF isn't brand new, but there's been I guess a relaunch from a certain perspective pretty recently. Snyk joined as a sort of top level member, as did like Microsoft and Google and a bunch of other big names, and you can hit there'll be a sort of members thing on there somewhere. It has definitely started out with a lot of software vendors, actually mainly big tech vendors, more than security ones, but there's a few others. But that's because it's new. This is, like as you mentioned, a new foundation, so under the Linux Foundation. That's what CNCF is, which I think is probably more familiar to lots of folks here. And also CNCF started out actually predominantly on the sort of software vendor side. It was only later that I think the CNCF did a great job of really pushing like end user members. OpenSSF is starting to do exactly the same thing. So you can see City there as a great example of someone who's been getting involved more recently. That at the moment, I think it's mainly large tech cos and sort of some of the like large financial services orgs. But I think that will change as it becomes more well known, which is good to talk about. This is an opportunity, I think, for some of what was great about CNCF. Like for good or ill, it became somewhere where a lot of people, both people who worked at software vendors, people who didn't, people in open source projects, came together to talk about a thing. And under CNCF, that was cloud native. And like OpenSSF is it's security, and it's open source security. It's already hosting some projects, but similar to CNCF, that will probably grow over time. So you've got things like SigStore. There's the open source the scorecards as a good example. That's another great example of sort of just to your, it's nearly akin to your SuperLinter example for security, not information. Like having a standard way of saying, okay, use this, and this is like universally known. So security hasn't always been, I guess, good in the open. It's not always been like good with agreement. Like there is a security industry. I mean, I'm part of that, but I think a fair criticism of the security industry is that it hasn't engaged in an open fashion. There aren't great sort of stories around open standards and the rest of it. That can happen, and I think the intention with the Linux Foundation of doing with OpenSSF is this is where it happens. This is a forum that we can all get around, and you know what? Agree on things that are better agreed on rather than competed over. Like open source and security has got a long sort of jagged history. Like how can we make, I mean, like something like Log4Shell will happen again. How can we make that better, literally for everyone involved, both for the maintainers, both for like project users, both for companies who were like scared but didn't really understand this. Like, what? There's some volunteer people on the internet, and that we're using their software. How do we pay them to fix it? He's like, no, you can't. Like that sort of all of that. Like, how can, like, we all want to solve that problem. We're probably better off doing it together. And yeah, OpenSSF is sort of trying to be that together. Again, I'm super supportive. Obviously, I'm like where we've joined as a member. I'm getting actively involved in some of the working groups. But yeah, I at this stage, I think keep an eye on things there. If you're very interested in security, like there might be some opportunities to get involved. But I would look for this to really grow over the next 6 to 12 months and become something that's like very interesting, like sort of home to interesting projects, like some of the education stuff that will come out of this, I think.
Yeah. I didn't know about these courses here. This is actually... Yeah, I didn't. I was just pointing out this.
New, or a lot of it's very new.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
very cool. I didn't know that they had this.
Heard about it, but yeah.
Sorry, we keep talking over each other. So all right, so people can take.
Coming, I think is the thing.
People can check out OpenSSF, the training there. There's a blog. Yeah, shop. What do I buy? Am I buying OpenSSF T-shirts? Is that what that is? Yes.
I'll always have swag. Yes.
All right.
There we go.
Very cool.
I'll have to get one of these. Oh, the obligatory plushie as well.
Yeah. That's some extra effort there. I need more on my wall back here. I have a flute. Well, they're always behind you. Nobody can see them. I have an increasing number of plushies and other little things, so I need to put more up there. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I think we're going to wrap it up here. We don't have any other questions. If anyone has a last second question they want to get at the very end, but we could talk for hours about this stuff. I think there's never really an end to this journey of sort of establishing a consistency. I think that's one of the things that I wanted to understand better of, and I'm glad to have you on the show to talk about this, was the fact that it sounds like we're going to be getting to some more standards that we can start adhering to, because I get questions a lot, right? I'm not claiming to be a security expert, but I get, people take my courses, people get me for consulting, and there's always security questions. And a lot of times for me, because I'm not the security expert, I'm not going to be the one writing policy or implementing procedures necessarily. So I end up to default down to the tool. I default to tools because that's how I can help them enforce and set standards. And so then the tools are essentially getting them the standards rather than the standards first.
We have to make security, like, not at the high level, but at the basic level, just there. Coming back to our previous conversation, are you a testing expert?
No.
And you probably go like, no. It's like, do you write tests for your software? It's like, yes. And something's like, well, are there testing experts? Yes, absolutely. Do you need to be one to do a pretty good job of testing your software today? No. How do we get security to that point? Yes, we need experts. Yes, we need this just there in the context for developers so you don't have to be an expert to benefit from it. There's loads to learn. We're in that interim period where there's lots of opportunities. There's loads of things to learn about. There is a deep domain. There's fantastic careers there as well, and there will continue to be, so they're not going away. At the same time as we have to make it such that developers don't have to be security experts to write more secure software.
Right. Yeah, enabling them to be sort of secure by default in their own activities without them having to know everything on every tool and every stack. That's really the hard part for me with my students, is there's just so much there. Where do they even start?
It's too hard today.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. The links, everyone, are obviously in the chat, and they'll be in the description here shortly. So if you didn't know, this show actually turns into a podcast, and you can get that at bretfisher.com/podcast. Links are below, and you can listen to that on your favorite podcast player. I don't know when this episode will come out, but eventually, next couple of months as we get through the backlog. And thanks, Gareth, so much for being on the show. And we'll see you all live here next week. Next week, by the way, is it next week? 24th? 17th.
Dates are hard.
Oh, next week is, dates are hard. Math, calendar math is the hardest of all math. Udemy, next week is Udemy Q&A. So if you're taking my courses, just come up. There's no topic next week. It's all Q&A. I'll just be by my lonesome here in the studio. But after that, we've got stuff coming up. We've got Brian Christner, Dr. Captain, talking about security in a gaming company. He runs jackpots.ch, I think. We've got Jim, CEO and co-founder of Nirmata, Guardrails for Kubernetes, founder of Kyverno. We've got Loft Labs talking about virtual Kubernetes clusters. We got Pulumi. We got a ton of stuff coming over the next couple of months. So please come back to join us on Thursdays, or just watch it later or listen to the podcast. Thanks, everyone.